Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty universal.
Absolutely.
How to make sense of just this massive flood of information we get bombarded with and, make good decisions without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a real challenge.
So we're drawing on some ideas from the book Third Millennium Thinking. It basically takes these really sharp tools that scientists use.
And tries to translate them, yeah?
Exactly. Into a language we can actually use day to day.
Think of it as trying to give you a bit of a shortcut to clarity. We've looked at excerpts that really aim to bridge that gap between the scientific mindset and, well, just navigating modern life.
Right. So our mission for you in this deep dive is pretty straightforward.
Mm.
We want to arm you with some strategies, ways to cut through the noise.
Identify what really matters.
Yeah, when you're grappling with some complicated issue, and hopefully feel a bit more confident and, frankly, less overloaded by it all.
Because, and the book really hammers this home, even with all the amazing things we can do scientifically.
Like leaps in tech,
Right.
medicine.
Right. We still often struggle as a society just to agree on basic facts.
Which makes solving problems together incredibly difficult.
It really does.
And the core message we're digging into here is that by understanding and maybe using some of those fundamental thinking tools from science.
Not in a complicated lab coat kind of way.
No, just in an accessible, everyday manner. That's how we can make better decisions. So, okay, big decision, tons of conflicting advice.
Yeah.
Where do you even start?
Well, the book suggests a really crucial first step is thinking about who you actually turn to for information, especially when you're in, unfamiliar territory.
Right.
We see majority opinion playing a big role sometimes, and that, that can be useful.
Sure. It's the basis for a lot of democratic stuff. But the book makes this great point. Imagine you had a serious health issue.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't just poll your neighbors, right?
Yeah.
You'd seek out qualified doctors.
Exactly. When the stakes are really high and you don't know the landscape, the quality of the advice matters way more than just how many people agree.
Makes sense. Specialized knowledge is powerful.
It really is. And just cutting yourself off from experts, well, that's kind of self-defeating. But the book also points out, pretty smartly, 3 big hurdles we face when we try to use expert advice well.
Okay, hurdles. Let's break those down. What are they?
Okay, first challenge, just figuring out what specific knowledge you actually need, and then finding truly reliable experts in that field, especially when you're not an expert yourself.
Right. It feels like you need to be an expert just to find the expert.
Kind of, yeah. Second, okay, say you find someone trustworthy. How do you blend their advice with your own stuff? Your values, your feelings, your goals.
That's key. An expert might give you the statistically best path, but maybe it just doesn't sit right with you personally.
Precisely. And the third challenge, it's about legitimacy and your own autonomy.
Meaning?
Meaning, who ultimately gets the final say and why? How do you make sure the final call respects your freedom, your values, even after leaning heavily on what an expert said?
The book also quickly mentions this interesting distinction, deciding for yourself versus deciding for others, like kids or animals.
Right, they bring up animal husbandry. We expect experts to make good choices for animal welfare, but we don't usually ask the cows for their opinion.
But with humans, it's different.
Generally, yes. We see humans as autonomous, so expert advice is super valuable, especially for your own choices, but there's always that element of personal decision-making, self-determination.
Which really underlines this point the book makes. Having a basic grasp of how scientists reach conclusions isn't just for scientists.
Not at all. It helps everyone. It gives you the literacy to, evaluate information critically and make smarter choices about who you trust.
And that feeds back into your own decision-making, too.
Exactly. And then the book throws up a red flag about a common trap.
Which is?
Putting so much weight on your own autonomy that you just reject expertise altogether, that whole do your own research thing, but taken to an extreme.
Oh, yeah. Down the rabbit hole of infinite online searches. The book points out, quite rightly, that what just feels right or rings true to you, well, that's not always accurate.
Not by long shot. Our biases play a huge role in what resonates. Maybe we like someone charismatic, or maybe a story just confirms what we already believed anyway.
That's the danger, isn't it? We all have these blind spots about our own biases.
We do, and that makes us vulnerable to making big mistakes, sometimes even dangerous ones if we just rely on our gut feeling. The book uses this analogy. An army under attack, but its radar is down.
Completely blind to the incoming threat.
Yeah.
Now, the book is careful to define what it means by third millennium thinking. and how it connects to actual science. It doesn't pretend scientists are perfect.
No, definitely not. It says it's based on the hard-won current best practices of science.
Yeah.
But it admits, science is done by humans. Humans make mistakes, sometimes misunderstand things, occasionally even have bad motives.
But the focus here, for us, is on the aspirational side of it. Those methods, constantly refined, that have led to huge breakthroughs. When science follows those principles rigorously.
That's when it really shines. And to help us grasp this, the book uses some really neat examples, this idea of reality beyond the senses.
Things that are real, we can understand them, but maybe we can't see or touch them directly without some help.
Exactly, like a telescope showing distant galaxies,
Or a microscope revealing tiny microbes.
a sound analyzer breaking down a chord, or, the classic one, a prism splitting white light into a rainbow.
And it's interesting how these instruments basically extend our senses, right? They show us a reality that's much richer, more complex than what we first see. A prism shows white light isn't just white.
It's a mix of colors, just like a found spectrograph shows all the frequencies in one noise.
And the book reminds us, people were often skeptical at first, like Galileo and his telescope.
Oh yeah, critics just said those spots he saw on the moon were like flaws in the glass, not actual mountains or craters.
But what's crucial about the scientific way, and what Galileo showed, is that emphasis on repeated observation, on evidence, not just accepting what some authority figure said.
Right. Remember, everyone knew the Earth was the center back then. Galileo's consistent observations, those peculiar spots, they were verifiable evidence challenging that whole view.
And it wasn't just enough for him to see it. That's key in science, isn't it? Others have to be able to check it independently.
Absolutely fundamental. Making telescopes available so others could look too. That was huge for building trust and validating the findings.
And Galileo's work wasn't just about moonspots. It was bigger, trying to unify how things worked up in the heavens and down here on Earth.
Paving the way for Newton and his laws, it was a massive shift.
The book uses a couple of metaphors to help picture how scientific knowledge is structured. One is the raft. Okay, explain the raft thing.
Okay, imagine knowledge is like a raft built from logs tied together. Individual ideas, the logs can be tested. If one turns out to be rotten, you can replace it.
Without the whole raft sinking.
Exactly. The connections keep it stable. You don't have to tear everything down and start over. You fix or replace bits while the rest holds up.
That sounds less scary than thinking you have to rebuild everything constantly. What's the other metaphor?
The other is the pyramid, which is more hierarchical. Higher levels built on fundamental beliefs at the base, maybe things you don't question much.
Oh, good.
The book contrasts that with the raft, stressing that in science, ideally, no log, no idea, is completely off limits from being examined or challenged.
And getting a solid grip on something complex, like, say, what sunlight is. Scientists don't just use one tool, right?
Definitely not. It's all about triangulation, using multiple instruments, different methods, trying to get them all to point to the same answer. Gathering evidence from lots of angles builds a much stronger picture.
Which brings us to this idea of reality-based decisions. Even if you can't, directly mess with the thing you're studying, these instruments help us agree on a shared reality.
Yeah. Once we use these tools, analyze sound, light, disease spread like cholera, we usually find pretty strong agreement on what they show. You don't often hear, well, the LED lights behave this way for you, but totally different for me.
Right.
The goal is a shared understanding so we can act effectively. Like finding the contaminated water source in the cholera outcome. Understanding led to action.
But interacting with reality isn't always that quick or direct, especially when things happen over really different timescales.
That's a huge challenge for our understanding. We're good at cause and effect when things happen close together. You touch a hot stove, you feel pain immediately.
Got it.
But processes that take years, decades, centuries, like climate change, it's much harder to feel that direct link between the cause and the eventual effect. That delay messes with our perception.
Speaking of links, correlation versus causation. Super important distinction the book dives into. We hear the phrase all the time.
Correlation does not equal causation.
Right. But what does that really mean in practice?
It's fundamental. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. The book lays out 4 basic ways to think about a correlation you see.
Okay, walk us through them. First, maybe A really does cause B. Simple enough.
Or the reverse. B could be causing A.
Okay.
Then maybe there's some hidden factor, C, that's causing both A and B. Remember the osteoporosis and alcohol example? Maybe something like lifestyle causes both.
A shared cause. Got it. And the fourth.
Fourth possibility. There's just no direct causal link at all. It could be pure coincidence or some really complicated indirect relationship.
So how do we figure out which it is? How do we untangle causation?
Well, the book points to experimentation as the, quote, gold standard for testing causation.
The classic scientific experiment. How does that help?
The magic word is intervention. Scientists deliberately step in and change something, manipulate a variable, while trying to keep everything else the same.
Like the magnesium and heart disease study.
Exactly. Randomly give magnesium to some people, a placebo to others. That disrupts any existing links due to lifestyle or whatever, and lets you see if magnesium itself has a direct effect.
You actively change one thing to see its specific impact. The book had that funny barometer example.
Oh, yeah. Physically moving the needle to see if that changes the weather. Obviously it doesn't, but it shows the principle of direct intervention.
But you can't always experiment.
Right.
Ethically, practically.
Absolutely. The example of soot and cancer in chimney sweeps is stark. You could never ethically assign people to be exposed to soot just to see what happens.
So if experiments are out, how do we infer causation from just a correlation? The book mentions Percival Pott and Austin Bradford Hill.
Right. Even without experiments, really strong, consistent correlations can be powerful evidence, especially if there aren't other good explanations. Pott saw that so many chimney sweeps got this specific cancer, and their exposure to soot was unique and constant. That was compelling.
And Austin Bradford Hill built on that kind of thinking.
Yeah, he developed a set of criteria, really useful guidelines to help assess if a correlation is likely causal when you can't do an experiment.
What are some of those?
Things like, how strong is the correlation? Is it consistent across different studies, different groups? Is there a dose-response relationship? More exposure equals more effect? Is there a plausible biological mechanism? Does the cause happen before the effect? Things like that.
Temporality, plausibility.
Exactly. And he even mentioned analogy does it resemble other known causal links. The book shows how these ideas even apply in astrophysics, like figuring out the link between supermassive black holes and how galaxies form.
Wow. Okay, but even when a link seems likely, the book stresses our understanding should almost always be probabilistic, not absolute.
Yes. This shift to probabilistic thinking is so important. We tend to want things to be black or white, true or false.
Definitely.
But science accepts that our understanding is almost always incomplete. There's usually some uncertainty.
So that one anecdote, my uncle got the vaccine and still got sick, doesn't automatically disprove the vaccine works overall.
Precisely. That's like John Stuart Mill's swans example. Seeing only white swans doesn't prove all swans are white. But seeing one black swan does disprove the all swans are white claim. Science moves away from those brittle, absolute claims.
And instead, we should get comfortable expressing confidence as a probability, like on a scale.
Yeah, 0 to 100%. It acknowledges our knowledge isn't fixed. It's okay to say, based on what we know, I'm maybe 85% sure this is right, or this is newer, maybe I'm only 60% confident right now.
And the book also notes that uncertainty isn't just about our lack of knowledge. Sometimes reality itself has randomness built in.
Good point. Like a supernova going off or a huge solar flare. There's an inherent unpredictability. Even with medicine, a treatment might work 70% of the time, but for any single person, it's still a probability game. Thinking probabilistically helps manage risk in inherently random systems.
Which leads right into this crucial skill.
Yeah.
Calibrating our confidence. It's not just how confident you feel,
But how well that feeling matches your actual accuracy over time.
Calibration.
Great. So a well-calibrated expert who says they're 90% sure should actually be right about 90% of the time when they make similar claims. The book gives that example of a respected scientist making a super confident but wrong COVID prediction without any hedging.
It's not about being wrong sometimes. It's about not acknowledging you could be wrong. The book had that simple test, like asking yourself which canal is longer, Panama or Suez.
Yeah. And then rating your confidence. The goal is to get your stated confidence to match your hit rate. If you're always saying, I'm 99% sure, but you're wrong half the time.
You're overconfident, underestimating your own ignorance.
Exactly. Like those financial experts with ridiculously narrow predictions for the stock market. It shows poor medic knowledge. They didn't understand the limits of their own knowledge.
And Phil Tetlock's research on foreign policy experts. Kind of sobering.
Very little correlation between how confident they sounded and how accurate they actually were. Feeling certain doesn't make you right.
Interestingly, the book mentions natural scientists, like physicists, have been better at tracking their calibration.
Yeah, partly because they often have huge data sets, big collaborations, they can statistically check predictions, and they've learned from history, like early measurements of the speed of light that were way too confident in their precision.
So they learn to be more cautious, demand more cross-checking.
Generally, yes. Meteorologists, though, seem pretty well calibrated for short-term forecasts.
Why is that?
Probably because they get constant, fast feedback. Their professional reputation hinges on accuracy. It shows how professional culture and feedback loops matter.
We should all aim for that IBM Watson level of meta-knowledge from Jeopardy.
Maybe. But realistically, pay attention to language. Does an expert sound absolutely certain, or do they use words like probably, likely suggests? That can be a clue.
Though there's often pressure to sound certain, even when things are murky.
True. Which brings us to another key idea. Distinguishing signal from noise, and not just literal noise.
Right. In this context, what's signal?
Signal is the trace, the evidence, the information about the underlying thing you're trying to detect or understand.
And noise.
Noise is everything else. Random fluctuations, irrelevant data, stuff that obscures the signal. And the big takeaway is, it's often not obvious which is which. Context is everything.
So you have to keep asking, is there a real pattern here? Or just random junk? Are we maybe confusing the two?
Exactly. The book uses climate change as a prime example. Look at that jagged graph of global temperatures over 150 years.
Lots of ups and downs year to year.
That's the noise. The challenge is seeing the long-term warming trend, the signal within that noise, and also identifying the main drivers like CO2, which are signals for change, versus other fluctuating factors, which might just be noise.
The book uses simpler analogies too, like the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah, create too much noise, false alarms, and
Yeah.
people stop hearing the real signal, danger, or where's Waldo? The noise is deliberately designed to look like the signal.
And the signal-to-noise ratio, that's just about how strong the signal is compared to the background noise.
Pretty much. Higher ratio, easier to spot the signal. It's a core idea everywhere from engineering to stats.
So how do we deal with noise? How do we find the signal? Filtering is one way.
It's filtering, yeah.
Yeah.
Focusing on specific characteristics, like tuning a radio to pick up one frequency amidst static, or SETI, listening for non-random patterns in cosmic noise.
And the Higgs boson discovery, that involved signal and noise too.
Fundamentally, yes. Scientists were looking for a tiny bump, a small excess of particles at a certain energy above a huge background noise of other particle collisions.
The bump was the signal.
Exactly. And the massive challenge was being sure it wasn't just a random blip in the noise.
Which highlights a crucial danger. The more noise you have, the easier it is to get fooled.
Totally. Look at enough random data, you will find seemingly surprising patterns just by chance. Like flipping coins all day, eventually someone gets a long streak.
But when someone reports just the streak, you don't know how many billions of flips happened beforehand.
Precisely. That lack of context makes you vulnerable. Like those mutual fund managers claiming amazing track records, maybe they just got lucky for a few years. Randomness creates temporary winners.
Or that disappearing pulsar signal that turned out to be faulty equipment, mistaking noise for a real signal.
A classic cautionary tale.
This ties into false positives and false negatives. Errors in judgment under uncertainty, like a trial verdict.
Right. False positive, convicting the innocent. False negative, letting the guilty go free. Both are errors, but different kinds. Sins of commission versus omission.
And in medical tests, sensitivity and specificity.
Same idea. Sensitivity is the true positive rate, catching the signal when it's there, avoiding false negatives. Specificity is the true negative rate, correctly identifying when the signal isn't there, avoiding false positives.
And there's usually a trade-off.
Often, yeah. Making a test super sensitive might mean it flags more things incorrectly, more false positives. Setting the threshold requires balancing which error is worse in that specific context.
And our own biases can affect where we set that threshold.
Oh, for sure. Your expectations can nudge you. The book mentions that example of releasing psychiatric patients deemed dangerous because of budget cuts. Examiners, maybe prioritizing public safety above all, might have had a high false positive rate, wrongly restricting liberty.
And the book stresses that where you set that threshold, how much proof you demand, isn't purely scientific. It's a value judgment.
Exactly. Science estimates the probabilities, but deciding which risk is more acceptable, that's about values. Policy.
Okay. Now, the book distinguishes two kinds of uncertainty we need to know about.
Right. First is statistical uncertainty. that random scatter around the true value, like hotel scales giving slightly different readings each time.
And you can reduce that.
Taking more measurements and averaging them, the random errors tend to cancel out.
But then there's the other kind, systematic uncertainty.
Yes, the sneakier one. This pushes every measurement in the same direction, like your home scale always being 3 pounds light. More weigh-ins won't fix that bias.
So how do you handle systematic error?
It's tougher. First, you have to brainstorm all the ways your measurement could be systematically wrong. Then, invent ways to check for those biases or limit their effect. Compare different tools, calibrate against standards, design the measurement differently.
Like timing Sarah's lap. Statistical error is her varying speed or the coach's slightly shaky thumb. Systematic error is if the stopwatch itself is slow or the coach always clicks late.
Perfect example. And think about global temperature, statistical uncertainty, daily weather wobbles, maybe some iffy thermometers you average over many places and time.
But systematic biases.
Huge potential there. Thermometers moved over time, measurement methods changed, like switching from ship engine intakes to buoys. These create offsets you have to painstakingly figure out and adjust for. It becomes part of the whole probabilistic picture.
And again, deciding when the evidence, with all its uncertainties, warrants action on something like climate change. That involves those value judgments about risk.
Absolutely. And the book really emphasizes that figuring out and tackling these systematic uncertainties, that's a core creative challenge in science. It takes real ingenuity and perseverance.
Perseverance.
Yeah,
Yeah, the book touches on how we humans tend to shy away from hard thinking. It feels like effort.
it does. But sticking with complex problems, analyzing them rigorously, is often how you get to real solutions. And sometimes the best solutions aren't about fighting over a fixed pie.
But finding ways to grow the pie, increase the total resources.
Exactly. Like how extreme poverty fell globally, not mainly through redistribution, but through massive increases in overall production technology. Or the idea of tackling climate change by making clean energy so cheap and good
Yeah.
that the political fights become less relevant because everyone benefits.
Potentially, yes. It's an optimistic but powerful way to frame problems.
Now, for really complex problems with tons of factors, how do you even start? The book talks about orders of understanding. Right. The basic idea is not everything matters equally. You can often get a good first grasp by focusing on the 1 or 2 biggest factors the first order affects.
Like planning a flight, knowing the Earth is a sphere, first order, is usually enough.
Pretty much. But for a road trip across a continent, now the second order stuff, like mountains, becomes really important.
Start with the big picture, then zoom in on details if needed. Don't get lost in the weeds right away.
Exactly. Which connects nicely to Fermi problems.
Ah, those back-of-the-envelope calculation questions.
Yeah. Estimating something when you have almost no hard data. The trick is breaking it down into smaller pieces you can make reasonable guesses for.
Like estimating cars in the U.S. by guessing population, household size, cars per household.
Right. Use rough numbers, round things off, aim for the right ballpark, the right order of magnitude, and try to estimate upper and lower bounds too to get a feel for your uncertainty.
The book did one on gasoline spending.
Yeah. Number of cars times miles per car divided by miles per gallon times price per gallon. Even with rough guesses for each part, you can get surprisingly close to the real number. And the process itself makes you think through the factors involved.
And finally, the book shows how you can use these tools, orders of understanding, Fermi estimates, to get perspective on big societal issues. Like comparing spending on prisons versus education versus Social Security.
By estimating rough numbers people involved, cost per person, you can quickly see the relative scale. Make a simple table. In their example, Social Security clearly pops out as a likely first-order factor in that specific comparison of social spending.
So this whole package, scientific optimism, orders of understanding, Fermi problems, it's like a practical toolkit.
A can-do tool set, as the book puts it, for tackling things that seem overwhelming. It encourages you to question claims, look for the big drivers, and not be paralyzed by complexity.
Absolutely. It feels empowering.
It really is.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground from third millennium thinking, all aimed at helping you, our listeners, navigate this complex world a bit better.
Yeah, choosing experts, understanding causality, getting real about confidence levels, spotting signal and noise.
Making smart estimates. It's all about thinking more clearly.
And these aren't just, abstract ideas, they're practical mental tools. They offer a way to stay informed without getting totally swamped, hopefully leading to better decisions personally and maybe even societally.
Couldn't agree more. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Next time you hit a complex issue, or a claim that sounds just a bit too certain, or you're facing conflicting info.
Pause for a second.
Yeah, pause, think.
Hmm.
Could applying even one of these ideas, maybe just asking, what's the first order factor here, shift how you see it? What might be getting overlooked?
It's about empowering yourself to make better sense of it all.
Exactly. Thanks for diving deep with us.